Welcome to Agile After Dark, the podcast that addresses agile topics not talked about in the light of day. I'm Brandon Gartley.
I'm Jessica Gusteles.
And I'm Greg Adams Woodford, otherwise known as GAW.
And we're going to dive into what I find a very fascinating topic that bridges psychology, productivity, and product development. So, kind of building off some of the podcasts that we've had very recently. And we'll explore how the concept of flow, not like delivery flow, but people and groups getting into the state of flow as defined by, we can try and get this name right, Dr. Mahali Csikszentmihalyi, a renowned psychologist, thanks, who we will now be referred to as Dr. MC for the rest of the podcast. Thank you very much. But how, his look at flow can revolutionize kind of our approach to iterative delivery of products based on getting people and groups of people into this state to be more effective.
To be the amazing human beings that we know they can be.
Yeah.
So today we're going to do a quick overview of what flow is all about, how it relates to product development, essentially why are we talking about it, the challenges we see organizations facing in setting the environment for the humans that are wanting to be in flow, frankly, to get into flow, and what techniques like peak performance triggers can help them overcome those challenges. It's really fascinating. The brain science, the neuroscience, I'm really excited to dive in.
And before we dive in, I just want to remind everybody to please join the podcast and give us some feedback if you like the video. We just started this. We think it's a much better experience. So please reach out to us at what's our current.
Just look up Agile After Dark on YouTube or any podcast, service that you listen to, and you will find us. We are there. The subscriber rate is increasing incrementally, so we're very excited about that. Thank you for all of you that have joined and liked the videos, and we appreciate the feedback. So as Jess said, we're going to do a quick overview of flow. We may get into kind of as we typically do, as we're talking about the things, we might get into what we've seen and what the challenges and stuff like that. But we don't want to spend too much time kind of getting into the background, but it's kind of important because flow can have a lot of different meanings in the world that we live in. Like I mentioned that there's kind of like that productivity flow. It's like Reinerson described and defined and had the book with all the metrics and the math and the stuff like that. But this is less about that, and it's really more about how we get into a certain state as individuals and as groups. So Dr. MC's definition of flow, and actually I have the book. Yeah, I do have the book here because I was looking at it in preparation for this. So it's this flow book here. It's called The Psychology of Optimal Experience. And this is and I don't push books very often, but this is one of my favorite books from a coaching perspective, because it's almost as if Socrates had 20 plus pages of references and hundreds of studies to put behind his theories. This is probably what would be that. He has chapter titles like Happiness Revisited, I think the Anatomy of Consciousness, the Enjoyment and the Quality of Life, Cheating Chaos. Jess, we were talking about chaos and that'll kind of come up in our conversation, right? And the Making of Meaning. So it's and it gets into the kind of the things that we're going to talk about today, but it is in a much larger, broad sort of subject of how psychology works and how our brain, chemistry works and so forth. And it's really neat because I think one of the most important things is we're kind of talking about the subject areas is that every single one of us as individuals are capable of this, right? We all have the ability to get into this state. It's not like you have to have you're more predisposed to be able to get into the state. It's all built into us, and a lot of mammals actually, not just us. So his definition is that it's a state of complete immersion and optimal experience where individuals are fully engaged in an activity. And in this state, people often lose track of time and are completely absorbed with the task at hand. And I think it's funny in the last podcast, Jess, you kind of were tried to correct me, but you were like, "Ah, we'll just let it go." Where I was like, I said something to the effect of, "Oh, you can be doing something for a little bit of time, but it can," or see, I'm going to get it wrong again. I think it's basically the concept of you could be doing something for a little bit of time, but it could seem like a long period of time, or it's the opposite. I keep
Yeah,
forgetting what
be
it's
doing
the opposite, right? You could be doing for something for a long period of time, but it could seem like it was like 5 minutes, right?
yeah,
Exactly. So that's kind of like the concept. And I think we probably have all been there. I think of like, uh, any sort of time that, have been kind of working on something that you're really passionate about. And we'll talk about some of the different things that create that. And you'll be like, wow, that was really quick. And you realize that time had, been a lot longer than that. Um, so yeah, it's just kind of an interesting of just, if we think about it, and we'll talk about how it relates to our work, but that's kind of some background in terms of his definition. But I know there's some key characteristics that we wanted to kind of talk about as well.
yeah. Well, what I love about what you just said, Brandon, is I think we've all at some point had the experience of being in flow. It's like you're so dialed in and so like on purpose, and it makes doing the thing that you're doing, it's easy isn't the right word necessarily, but it's like you're really working on something that this is what you're here to do in this moment. And I think that's part of the key characteristics, is really that intense concentration on the present moment. And to your point about this being really great for coaches, is that a lot of coaching is really figuring out, like, how do we get present and be with the thing that we're doing in whatever moment that we're doing it. And so um, working as a coach, working on coaching is really like, I actually find myself in flow when I am coaching, because I am so intensely concentrated on the present moment with that person that's in front of me. So there's that piece of it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
I think that one of the other ones was, and this is easy. This is like a softball for us, but it's um, like being able to like have a set of goals that are very clearly understood and getting immediate feedback, right? Kind of fits into our wheelhouse, right?
Goals and feedback, vision,
Right.
feedback, goals.
Yeah, but we'll get in kind of some of the brain stuff behind it. But you know, the fact that we've been talking about this as coaches for so long, and particularly like in the agile field and so forth, where we say, hey, it's really good for people to understand what you're trying to achieve. We talked about OKRs and those kind of things, right? And shortening the gap between business and IT. But instead of hey, how are we organizationally or process wise, like how process wise, how are we trying to like fix this thing, and then make sure that there's feedback so we can get things fixed and so forth. This is at like a much more basic level in terms of like our human nature, right? Is that we are better able to work and understand and get into something if we understand what it's about and we have some sort of connection to it, and if we get feedback, right? And I think it's funny, feedback has been kind of given a negative connotation in a lot of ways around, oh, if I'm getting feedback is because I've done something wrong,
Right.
right? Whereas in this case, it's I'm very passionate about something and I'm really interested in something, and we'll talk about those triggers that'll help us kind of get into those things. Uh, and then once I've done it, I think it's natural to be like, I want to share this. I want someone to like understand this as much as I've understood or got into it and thought it was really cool. Like I want to share the story, right? So guys, we were just talking about off air, it's his kids and kind of like talking about their days, and like, they're just like they're excited about something, they want to like share it with someone. And I think that, they're looking for that feedback, right?
Yeah. And one thing I would, and this hopefully will lead to a broader discussion, but as you were talking, I was just thinking about, so one of my most favorite and passionate things that I've done in my personal career is education, working on education through K-12 software, education, because there's an immediate feedback you get when you're getting up in the morning and you're helping people, right?
Mm.
You're making a direct impact on people's lives and you can see it. But I was thinking about it, especially when I was like VP of this, that, or the other thing. I can think about my day as being very fragmented. Okay. So I'm going from meeting to meeting, talking to people, listening to their problems. And people are kind of like, what does he do exactly? But I don't. And so what I'm asking is and so therefore I'm kind of fragmented in the way that I'm doing my day, but it's kind of what my job requires.
Hmm.
How does, and it may be just the way I think or something, but how do you think that is in relationship to what you're talking about, being able to focus on a thing, and get into a certain kind of flow versus
Yeah.
just having everybody come at you all at once and you're just trying to keep everything going?
Yeah. I'll take a quick stab at it, and Jess, I'll be interested in your thoughts on this. And it kind of gets into one of the next characteristics, which is kind of a loss of self-consciousness. So this gets to where like you've been doing something and then all of a sudden you're like, wow, like I thought that was really short, and like I've been doing this for a long time. The example that I see a lot is like professional athletes. God, is like, you know, Steph Curry's, where it's like the basket looks like it's a hula hoop. It looks like you could just shoot in it all day, right? Now, that takes a lot of practice and things that you're doing, but it's a passion for it. Like for them to get to the level that they're at, they have to have a real passionate belief in, this is something I love doing. And so for your example, what I think of is it's not your full day that you're like, oh, I'm in flow of the full day, but it may be that that time that someone comes, or you're walking around the floor, if you will, and you do that thing where you're like, hey, I see you have that Star Wars like figure, like, and you start getting into that conversation, and that conversation may be going like 1,000 different directions, and it may not be okay, I told you to do this, now you're going to go do it, but you kind of like, you felt like your purpose was met based on what we talked about before, right? And that could have been very natural to you, and you just, kind of flow with it, right? And then next thing you know, you're like, oh man, that felt really good. Like I felt like, and I think I left that conversation making that person, feel a lot better. So that's kind of my initial take. Jess, I'd be kind of curious your take on that question.
Yeah, I love your take on that, Brandon. And I think I think it depends. Gosh, I'm such a consultant still.
What do you think the answer is?
Well, I love the idea that it's, you could be in flow in meeting after meeting after meeting, because you are so intensely present in each one of those moments. So like, even though there might be a shift in the, I'm actually going to take your Steph Curry example, a shift in the play, right? Each play is going to be different. You're going to be up against a different opponent. You're going to be up against this guy, or everybody's standing in a different spot, or whatever it is. But even though the sort of it's not the environment, but like the circumstances might change bit by bit by bit, I make up that you could still be in flow even though the circumstances are kind of moving around you. And once again, it's back to that sort of intensity of concentration, presence in the moment. It also makes me think of that, like that loss of self-consciousness. Again, going back to coaching, is that one of the meta skills of coaching is being able to use your intuition. So like, if I was not in flow in a coaching state, I wouldn't grab that one little, like, interesting, you just look like you got itchy there for a second. What's that about? Because if I wasn't in flow and I was self-conscious, I don't think I'd be like, you just scratched your neck. That was weird. What's that about? Right. But because I'm in flow and because I'm so present in the moment, as Greg itches, I'm not worried about that because I'm intensely on and in purpose. And it's like magic is just happening.
Yeah, I think that actually is a good way to put it, because when I was going from person to person to person, the whole day, I was zoned in on that one, because I feel you have a personal responsibility to connect to people and to invest in them, yourself in them, so you can build good teams. So there's trust and respect, right?
Let me ask you this. Can you think back to a day where you were like, man, I'm just on it. Like it's going. Today is going.
I don't think my brain works that way because I wasn't.
Let me ask it a different way, Greg. Let me ask it a different way. This is where because I'm like talking about kids. Sorry. What did you ever? And I know the answer to this. So that's why I'm asking it this way. You've got to the end of the day, and you're like, that was a pretty good day.
Yeah, I could say definitely that. I can say that for sure. And it does depend. I just think it's an interesting thing because I'm very interested in this topic because I don't feel like I'm very effective at this thing because of concentration. And so even though I just said what I said about people and being present, and I do think I do that, but I don't know if I'm, you know what I mean? It's like I don't know if I'm very good at it. Let's just put it that way.
Interesting.
That's amazing because here's the thing is that just like Agile is a muscle you can build, and meditation is a muscle you can build, and lifting weights is a muscle you can build, so is flow. You can actually practice and get better. And we'll talk, I think, Brandon.
Yeah. We'll talk about the triggers that actually help kind of get you into that space. So you'll be a kind of a good litmus test for this, Scott, in terms as we're talking about it.
It's like my therapy.
Next time we podcast, God's going to come over and be like, man, I have just been in so much flow.
Yeah.
You know where I'm in one place I am in the flows when I'm cleaning the kitchen. Okay. Then I'm like, I got to set up. I'm there. I'm all in on my
perfect
kitchen.
Example.
And
perfect
then Grace
example.
comes, my daughter comes and messes it all up. Like the minute I am done.
Well, it's funny because one of the other characteristics that it kind of is related to this, but Jess, I was thinking about what you were talking about being in a coaching moment, and if you felt like you weren't confident enough in what you're doing, it'd be harder to get into flow. And that's kind of where it gets into, and this is probably one of the most important ones in my mind, in my experience, as I've been kind of getting into this and trying to use this as I'm doing consulting and coaching, is the concept of a balance between the skill level and challenge. And the thought behind this is it's called like the challenge skills balance, right? So it's only like the golden rule of flow. So we really pay the most attention to what we're doing when a challenge kind of slightly exceeds our skill set, right? And I think we've all kind of experienced that, where if it's too easy, we're kind of like we're just going through the motions, and that's not losing self-consciousness. That's just like, oh, this is easy, and I'm just, that's like me driving home and I've got like the kid in the car seat, and like I get home and I'm kind of like, how the hell did I get it? That's not flow. That's not like the losing consciousness. That's just like because I'm on autopilot, right? Or if it's too hard, it's like too difficult for me to get into that state where I'm recognizing that itch in the nose, Jess, where I'm kind of like, hey, I'm trying to put all these things that I'm hearing into something, and I'm not actually hearing them because I'm trying to, make that jump, if you will, right? And so it's kind of a really, really important concept. It's like getting comfortable a little bit with being uncomfortable, right?
What I love about that, Brandon, is that, well, love and hate. This is a love-hate relationship with this one, right? Because it does require the self-awareness to know what will be that just 4% more challenging. And just like we were talking before, building a muscle at some point that no longer becomes challenging. And so you're no longer in flow doing the same thing. It then becomes rote, and you could lose yourself, to your point, but it's not, the energy isn't behind it. It's just is. So it's almost like you constantly have to check in with yourself. Am I pushing myself for that little bit more growth, but not doing it so hard that I'm actually causing myself damage because I don't ever get into flow because it's too difficult. I haven't built that muscle yet. It's fascinating.
Yeah, and Greg, I'll turn that piece of that onto you as like an executive or a leader, being conscious of that for the people that are kind of in your space and in your system, right? Like, how are you, we all talk about it in an abstract way in terms of, I can count on Molly over here because like she just gets the job done. Like boom, 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 boom. But if I need like a more creative problem solver, I might go over to this person, right? And I think what I've discovered is that we're falling into those traps of, oh, that's an easy thing for that person to take care of. I know they can get it done. I'm going to give that to them. And that's the kind of work that I keep giving to that person because I know I can get it done. And I know that they can get it done and I can count on them. Right. But what I find is, in particular with consulting with, leaders and so forth, they're like, yeah, this really dependable person, but they left. Why did they leave? Like they were one of my, like, I talked about them all the time, how I could depend on them. Right. But they left and I don't understand why. It's because they didn't have the right balance of the challenge.
Right. And I think that this is something I do have a lot of experience with, is that that is a very common problem, right? And because you're just trying to get your work done, you're depending on people, but you're not doing them any favors. You're not doing yourself any favors, because you should be trying to cross train as much as you can, because keeps people energized. They might bring different perspective. But again, if you just keep giving them same rote tasks or the same kinds of tasks, they don't grow, they get bored and they leave. You know what I mean? So you get to cut that, but it's hard to do, but you constantly have to be thinking about it. In my opinion, you constantly have to be thinking about it.
And then, so there's the other end of that spectrum, right? Which is, I gave this thing to Fred over here. And like, he came back and he didn't deliver. Like he didn't come back to me with what I expected. Right. And as a leader, I think we need to invest more in understanding what our individual team members challenge the skills balance. And that should be something that's more regularly kind of thought through versus kind of what you learn when you get your MBA.
What's interesting about this, y'all, is to me, this is defined is one of the facets of definitions of leadership versus management, right? Like we've all seen it. We've all been a part of agile transformations where we're saying like, stop telling people exactly how they're going to do things and hold it like, carrot and stick and all that, blah, 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 blah. And then they're like, well, what the is my job then? Like, what do I do? So the work of leadership, the real work of leadership, unfortunately for people in leadership, is much harder than, managing a Gantt chart. Or managing the financials is really paying attention to the human beings. How do we help them to get into flow? Because that ultimately is going to make better products, better services, better everything. But that's the human side. I firmly believe that the attention, the work, the effort that you have to put in to be truly a great leader this is one of those things. And it does take work. It does take effort. It does take conscious, like, this is why I'm here versus, the Gantt chart or name your thing.
And it's emotional. It's making an emotional investment, and not people don't, they separate that at work. You know what I mean? For me, I mean, it's just me, but I'm always making, I'm like conscious that there's an emotional investment I have to make. It's not just everybody's got stuff to do and everybody's busy, and it's like, is everybody doing the right thing, or where what's, there's something going on over here. Let me go over and talk to this person, and in whatever way, But it is hard, but you have to. If you don't commit to it, then you're not effective in any way, and it's not fun anyway. It's more fun to like know what do I need to do? What do I need to do to make people happy?
Right.
And it's so much more than like, oh, let's just go into our work management system and like spit out a bunch of teams and now they're going to go do the work that I need them to do. Like there's so much. Human beings, fortunately and unfortunately, have so many more facets to them. So like if you're quote unquote building teams, which means you haven't engaged the teams themselves at all, which is a whole nother issue. But it's not just, oh, I'm going to move these boxes around. It's really like, it's that, where are they at in their skills, and how do we help them move into that a little bit more? How do we help them? What is the cross functionality that's needed? But also, like, what are their collaboration styles, and do we have a good mix of diversity on this team? You know what I mean? Like, it's one
Yeah.
of the many facets that you have to pay attention to when creating an organization that's going to be happy and healthy. And it's I see so many go first to the, like, static data and try to do it that way, and it's just, it doesn't tell the whole story.
Yeah.
Nope.
Well, it's funny you mentioned happy and healthy, and we're talking about flow, and the bean counters of the world are listening to this. They're like, please, like tree hugging hippies. Like, it sounds great. Thanks so much. Not interested. Except Data Dork here will tell you that, recent studies have found that this can result in an increase of 500% increase in productivity.
Dang.
And almost 100% increase in solving very complex problems, right? So this is not just hey, we want to make sure everyone, and which is important because we've talked about that over and over, like, hey, we want to make sure everyone feels great and so forth. But I think this is why I'm so interested in this subject, because it kind of takes some of the more abstract things that we talk about in a coaching field and says, it's based off science. It's based off our actual brain chemistry and how we function as people, all people, right? All of us function this way,
And
right?
there's an ROI behind it.
And there's a huge ROI behind it. I mean, I'm actually very, very surprised when I start to broach this subject with, leaders that have been kind of out there in like larger enterprise organizations. And they're kind of, it's a similar sort of thing as like, flow. And then we'll talk about kind of the concept of peak performance. They're like, okay, tell me more about that. It's like a branding exercise, right? They're like, flow, that sounds, and that kind of gets confused with some of the other kind of more product management flow stuff. And they're like, I've kind of heard of it, wait, but this is different. And we'll talk about peak performance here in a little bit. But as, kind of talking about the brain size, kind of teasing that a little bit. And I won't go into too much detail because I would love to, and it's really fascinating, but it would probably go on forever. But the key thing is that it's basically, it's like how our neurotransmitters like interact with these different chemicals in our brain to enhance like cognitive and emotional functioning. So the key part of this is, and we all know this from our scrolling on phones that they've got us so addicted to, it's creating the dopamine rush. How do you create the dopamine rush that isn't the dopamine rush from some screen, right? It's like the reward molecule, right? How do we generate that, and how do we trigger that in a way that we feel that with the work that we're doing? So think about having the satisfaction that you have when you're like scrolling through those things that just suck you in, but that's what you're doing from your work. Like that, right? I saw your face, Jess. You're like, wow. Like, just like the satisfaction, because like, what do we do when we like leave and we have a break? I'm guilty of it. I'll like grab my phone. I'll be like, okay, what's going on in the world? And then and I'll be like, oh God, I've been doing this for 30 minutes. Like, what? I just wasted 30 minutes, and it felt like 5 minutes that I've been doing this. Like, how? It's exactly same brain chemistry trigger, but in a way around solving a problem versus just kind of just getting sucked into the scroll. So that's kind of the key one. And there's other ones. There's like, if you're getting into flow, like endorphins actually get released, right? So that's like the body's natural like painkillers. So like any sort of harm or psychological stuff that you're feeling bad about, or don't feel good, if you get into this state, like that goes away, right? So again, you think about the athletes when they're like, God, they must be tired and all that kind of stuff, and they talk about, no, I was just in the moment, and I just, all the pain, all the things, I didn't feel it, right? Because I've just, I made this amazing play because I was just in that zone, right? They call it in the zone, but that's being in a state of flow. And then kind of the the other key one I'll talk about is, and this will be the last piece of the actual brain chemistry piece. There's several different ones, and it's the important thing is it's like a cocktail that's different. So it's not like necessarily sequential in terms of you get the dopamine rush and then you get the all that kind of stuff. It's like kind of you think about like putting together the right cocktail, if you were, right? If you're gonna put together,
Cocktail, let's be honest.
yeah, and maybe cocktails will help a little bit. I don't know. This is Agile After Dark, right? But it's the serotonin, right? They kind of talk about it as like the straw that stirs the drink, right? It regulates your mood and social behavior, and it's the balance of all of these things together. So the serotonin kind of says like, okay, I'm going to get the right. It's like the recipe, like it brings it all together. And if you kind of have all of that, they create kind of this environment within your brain that like intensifies concentration, motivation, and into what we'll talk about with peak performance. So it's just so cool because it really is backed up by science, right? This isn't some philosophical idea. It is something that exists for all of us, and we've all experienced it in some form or fashion throughout our life. And it's a great rush, whether it's, God, I had to sit down and write that paper and all of a sudden next thing I knew it was done, or I need to get ready for that presentation. And some people, Greg, you were talking about, you get distracted and stuff. I have friends that are on the a neurodivergent, space, and they're like, yeah, I get distracted, but then I get like totally sucked into this thing and I'm in flow, and it's like such a rush that they in fact are trying to figure out how do I find that? What's the next thing? They're kind of trying to find the next thing to get there.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it's just so cool. It's so cool. I'm sorry I geeked out on that a little bit, but for me, it's just like such a neat sort of thing to kind of explain. Cause I don't know about the rest of you guys, but I get into these things where I feel a certain way and I'm kind of like, what was that? Like what,
Yeah.
how did I, and I want to get back there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait, that sounds great. How do I get that back? Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, on the note of how do we get that back, how do we get
Right.
that back? Like, what do we do? What are the things that we can proactively do? How do we set ourselves up a bit for success in getting into flow?
Yeah. And some of it's very similar to the stuff we teach and coach and consult every day, right? Like we talked about providing the goals and feedback, right?
Oh, we just talked about this. Like,
Yeah.
what clear goals and feedback that will help me get into flow. Fantastic. That's
Yeah.
self-flow. Cool.
But then you get into some of the things of like minimizing distractions. We were just talking about the scroll, right?
Yep.
This is an interesting one when we get into kind of our world for it, but I don't want to dive into it. But like ensuring there's no distractions, right? Or very minimal. So that means turning off your phone, turning off your IM, turning off your email, and basically being like, I'm out of here for 2 hours. Do not bother me, you know? And again, it seems crazy because you're like, well, what if something comes up and it's a 500% increase in productivity? This is the chip we're trying to balance here, right? So that's kind of so doing that. And then another one that's very similar to us that we talk about all the time is just ensuring autonomy.
Yeah.
Get out of the way. Set the right environment. We talked about in the last podcast. Set the right environment. Get out of the way.
Yeah, and that's a hard one, especially for leadership, because it's hard. So I was lucky enough to be sort of came up under managers who were leaders who were like, here's the problem, here's what we're trying to do, go figure it out. If you need something, help me, but I have trust in you that you can go do it. And if you need something, come back to me, and let them go do it. And it's their accomplishment. It's not, or they'll come to me and say, we need to do this. And I'll say, okay, what's the reason? And and then I'll say, okay, go do it. But it takes trust, and that's where it falls down.
I remember talking to a group of leaders once who they had a litany of frustrations and things that they were talking to me about, and And I recognized that this was a group of absolute micromanagers. And I was like, okay, I need to take a step back and just do a quick meta with them. And I said, can each of you think of the time that you grew the most and felt the most successful at work? It might have been hard, but you like that was your like, oh, here I am growing and doing and all of these things. And had them think about it. And I said, okay, give me one word for what the leader was like in that environment. And they listing off these things, right? Like I had clear goals. I knew what we were going to. We had a purpose. We were totally going towards something, right? It was hard, but I was getting feedback about how great I was doing, or if I was messing up, then they would tell me just so I could fix it. Like all of these things, like I loved coming to work every day, and I could make decisions, and I could fail at those decisions, but I could fail fast and early, and I could learn from them really quickly, and I could come to my leader with these learnings. So it was this group of okay, and I said, fantastic. So you all had this experience. That's wonderful. How are you showing up for the people that you're leading today? And to a person, their jaws dropped on the floor. Like it was that moment of, oh, I'm not being the leader who is creating the environment that is conducive to now the way what we're talking about now, flow, but it's connected to learning, growth, all of that stuff. And so like that autonomy piece is so important because it besides the flow piece of it is if you have autonomy with clear goals and feedback, that's personal growth, that's human growth, but it also keeps everybody, what we talk about oftentimes, I know people think is fluffy and all the things, but if you can get that happening and you have 500% productivity, think about where your products can go. Think about where your services can go. Think about what can happen with an organization that is aligned, autonomous. You've got people working in flow. You've got cultures of continuous learning where it's like, okay, what's my next 4%? What's my next 4%? And I think this also ties into like, Daniel Pink's.
Yeah.
What do we want? Purpose, mastery,
motivation. Yeah. What's our motivation?
What do we get? Drive.
Yeah.
If you get drive and flow.
Yeah. Well, I think that they very much overlap. Yeah. And in fact, I thought about it as you were talking about it, Jess, and I was just like, in the future, when I talk about this, I'll probably switch what I talked about and I'll say autonomy first, then minimize distractions. Because minimize distractions, you guys had the same reaction that most people do when you talk about. They're like, "Oh, that sounds really. Can I do that? Like, what if I need an emergency call? Like, what like someone's trying to reach me? Like we're so caught up in that. But if we have the autonomy to then go do something that is the right mix in the challenge versus skill set, right? And we can get feedback and continuously improve, like then you're kind of like you're really moving, right? And what I like about this in the way you described it, Jess, is because like how many times have we talked about an individual or we've talked about a group, and we can talk about group flow. It's just basically a group version of what we're talking about. And we say, they got it. I could just observe. I don't even have to talk to anyone. I can sit here and look over there and be like, yep, we used to like, oh, they're doing agile. I think that is too much of an amorphous sort of concept as we've talked about in the past, right? Whereas we're like, they're in flow. Like that kind of really does describe all of those pieces fitting together.
The other thing I love about this, like, okay, so we're talking about how do we create spaces that are conducive to flow, clear goals, hard but doable, immediate feedback, totally doable. We literally have practices around it. Challenging but achievable, hard but doable. Minimize distractions, hard as we've gone over, but doable. Encouraging autonomy, building trust, takes work but doable. Continuous learning, absolutely doable. It's something that we've talked about for 20 plus years at this point. So these amorphous sort of like, oh, if we could only, it's actually, if you're paying attention to the right things that are going to cause this 500% increase in productivity, and guess what, innovation, which is what everybody talks about, but part of me thinks that nobody actually wants, because we don't set these things up. It it's within reach. Like, we've done the work, we've done the science, we have the data, and it takes work to get there, but like, this is it, we have answers to these things. We can do it, which is what's exciting. Like, I if it's that thing, Brandon, that you were just saying, of like, what was that feeling and how do I get it back again? We
Yeah.
actually know how to get it back again. We know how to set
Yeah.
ourselves up for success. It's just a matter of going and doing it. So
Yeah. And that kind of gets us into kind of the evolution of this flow concept into this concept that's a little bit more marketed a little bit better. It's this idea of peak performance. So peak performance is really meant to say, to answer the question you just, or the challenge, answer the challenge that you just set forth, Jessica, which is, okay, this sounds great. How do we do it? How do we get there? Right. And the great thing is, instead of it being just kind of, again, kind of like, well, we have to set the right environment and stuff. Stephen Kotler, yes, I have his book here too. It's called, he's done several different books, but The Art of the Impossible, a peak performance primer. This is kind of comparable to Renderson's in a way, because it gets so science geeky about the brain in some ways. But his background is very interesting, because he was a journalist that really enjoyed skiing. And he got into journalism kind of in the early 90s, when kind of the extreme sports was really getting popular, like the snowboarding and, climbing and everything like that. And so he was like, I just basically followed all of these extreme sports people around and tried to understand, how do you learn to do these crazy things that you do? Because, like, and I think it's a question I've always asked when I watch, I was like, how, when they have those skateboard ramps that go up like 2 stories, like, how do you get the bravery? You can't really practice that. Right? Like, how do you, and that's the skills to challenge thing, because, like, you've got a certain level of skills in what you can practice, but, like, that challenge is a little bit higher, a few stories higher than maybe you're used to practicing on. Right. And so he kind of started to dig into it. It was like, what are the ways that these athletes, these extreme sports athletes, get into it? And they kind of started to do some research around, well, what are some of the flow triggers? So they talked about his flow triggers. Like, the dog was like, I want to hear about flow triggers.
I am ready to
go. But yeah, like, how do you, I'll wait till it comes back. There he is. But how do we get into that? And I think, as of the last thing that I read that he had published, there's like 22 they know of, like, that these triggers exist. And it's kind of understanding how these triggers lead into flow, and kind of getting the right balance, because we talked about the physical and mental states, right? So it's kind of cool. Like, he kind of gets into some of those, and I won't go through all 22, but it's great, because instead of us being like, okay, we know we have this thing that we need to do, and there's this balance you're supposed to have, he kind of took the science a little bit further, and kind of got into the details, which is cool.
It's a plug. You're plugging this.
Yeah, I know. And interestingly enough, not surprisingly, like, they've kind of similar to like Orisk and other things, Jess, they've kind of created their own sort of coaching, like, sector around this, right? Is to how they get into it.
Some good certifications that they charge for too.
Oh yeah, there's definitely certifications, and they're not cheap courses, but they kind of do it more as like for like corporate, like, learning and stuff. So I think that's cool, because typically the corporations will be able to, What'd you say, Jess?
I said, hey, make your money.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So But like there's like he says there is like kind of there's a little bit of a sequence, right? Um, so it's like curiosity is first, so that makes sense, right? Like, how do we like ignite that dopamine? Like, we're curious about something, right? Like, so the reason that we're scrolling through our phone all the time is we're curious about what's being served to us in the algorithms and stuff, and it's actually been curated information, and it kind of like, oh, I'm curious, like about, and you're giving me subject things that I want. But it's like it's kind of the spark, right? It's like you kind of want to like learn and explore a little bit more. So that kind of curiosity is like the first easy trigger to talk about. And as you kind of delve deeper into that, it kind of evolves into like passion, right? Like something that's sustained. Like I'm curious about, you can be curious about something and it kind of falls off because of whatever, right? But if you're curious enough, you get kind of passionate about that kind of stuff. Like, my son has certain health issues and it's related to his gut health and stuff. So I'm very interested now in kind of like food health and stuff like that, like kind of the wellness world that's blown up, over the last, 10 years, particularly because of social media. um, there's some stuff that's good, some that's not bad, but it's like, it's kind of interesting to kind of like, you kind of start to, okay, I want to learn more. I want to learn more. I want to learn more, and kind of get a passion about it for different reasons. But then it kind of turns into like driving to like purpose, right? What's my purpose, right? So that's kind of giving you direction and meaning, right? Behind that. So, now that I'm curious, I've got some passion about it, but like now, like I have a certain purpose, and and it's not purpose from we talk about purpose and we put them on, we talked about like our vision and mission stuff that they put up on the walls and so forth. Like that's kind of a amorphous purpose in my mind, right? This is more of like, honestly, is like a selfish purpose. Like this is connected to me up to this point, and so like now I have this purpose. um and then it gets into the Steph Curry of like, okay, now I have this purpose. Like I want to win championships. So I want to be a master, right? I want to be a master at whatever this craft is. And that's when you really start. So that you kind of go through those things. And then when you get to that mastery point, then you're getting into that challenge, the skills, the challenge, you're constantly trying to push that envelope of what the challenge is. So yeah, Jess.
What I love again about what you're saying, Brandon, is I actually just had the most incredible experience this last weekend. Have you ever being an observer or sort of like a part, like a next to someone who's in flow is one of the most incredible experiences. So um, I got to go to dinner, but sit at the bar of Chef Yi Vang's newest restaurant. So James Beard, he was on Top Chef, like big, all the names and all the accolades, right? So you're talking about, and he comes from the Hmong background, and so he's serving the food of his people to people in, of all places, Minnesota. Um, and wildly successful. So his purpose, as he's been so clear about, is celebrating the food of his culture, but also like celebrating the people that are coming to eat his food. Like to him, showing love through food and being in service of one of the most basic human needs, but doing it in a way that shows how much you truly care about them. That's that's him. That is his purpose. That's his being there, right? Then so name them again. So there's purpose. What's the next one?
Yeah, it's curiosity.
Curiosity. Obviously curious.
Yeah, right. Because like there's something that drove him to be the food person that
Yeah, because
he is,
and
right?
this work in Minnesota, will people
Right.
be willing to eat it? I mean, Minnesota is, talk about homogenous and not very interested in spices. But and curious about the food of where he came from. So he's his childhood, because he was the kid that had a lunchbox going to school that wasn't PB&J, and so he spent a long time pushing that away, and then that changed, and he got curious about what what are the foods of my culture? What are the foods of my people? And so there's that curiosity that also that's sort of involved in that piece of it. All right, name number 3.
So there's curiosity, passion, and then purpose.
Clearly passionate. Sorry,
Yeah.
I missed the first one. So purpose, we have curiosity, we have passion. We have passion in terms of like you get to see people on their best days when they're celebrating something, or their worst days when they've lost someone and they're coming together, or just a day. But again, feeding that most basic of human experiences, of, like, how can I be there for you? What's the last one you said?
Mastery.
Mastery. So clearly, James Beard,
Master Chef. Yeah.
on Top
Yeah.
Chef, Chef, whatever.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
So, but also sitting at the. So we sat at the bar right where he was, and he also immediately curious about us. Do you have any food allergies? Why? What brings you here? All of the things. Like so we've got a bartender. We've got actually a couple of bartenders. All very interesting and doing a great job. But he recognized, the I think probably the food people in us, and he was like, "Can I just give you this?" So he was like, he gave us some appetizers. Then, because we were talking about the experience, then feedback, right? So he got immediately, "Oh, this is amazing. Here's what I like about that. Hey, you know what's interesting? I'm actually playing with some flavors over here. Can I give this to you too? Because I'm just curious what you think." So then, like, he's playing with food over here and asking us to give that kind of that immediate feedback. And then, like, I don't know, it was just one of the most fascinating experience. Like, but autonomy, obviously, it's his restaurant. He gets to do what what he wants.
Yeah.
It's his.
Right. Yeah.
Minimizing distractions. There were no phones out in the restaurant anywhere. That's pretty typical of restaurants. Clear goals. Obviously, I want these people to have a great time, and continuous learning. Tell me more about this. I'm constantly trying to play with flavors. Like, all of that was incorporated. And being near something like that, and I equate it to, because I love watching ballet, when you see someone who's or waltz or something, when they're just dancing.
Jess, this is so crazy you're saying that, because I kind of, what I had the subject like group flow, and I had in my mind the analogy of a dance troupe,
Yes,
but like a dance troupe, restaurant. Greg, before we got on, you talked about watching, because you watch a lot of the food shows, like watching. It's like all
it's
of that, but
it's
it's not flow from a it's different, but it's kind of like watching how it all works together, right? It's
Yeah,
an amazing thing to be near or a part of or
yeah.
whatever. Just like I love that this is our topic, because I just had this wild experience and literally, like, been thinking about it since, and will probably think about it for years to come, because you both know I eat out a lot. But this was this was beautiful and orchestrated and collective, and just it being a part or being near someone in flow is truly one of the most magical things. And again, so fucking attainable. Like,
Right.
it's close.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's my totally aside. I just got really excited.
no, I'm really happy that you went through that, because I think that gives a very concrete example of that, and that people understand about how that looks and how that feels. And again, you covered all the different aspects, right, of flow. And I was sitting there next to you, because I would have loved that.
Greg, when next time you are in Minnesota, we are going
Yeah.
to this
Yeah.
restaurant. It's pretty spectacular.
And you had all the elements, and it's kind of when we were off air, you kind of like, you had said something, Jessica, about like controlled chaos,
Mm.
right? It's like becoming comfortable with the uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
Right. And that's
It's a
that kind
new
of,
I mean, talk
yeah.
about a challenge. And this is, his other restaurants were so good. but none of them is elevated as this one. I mean, there's a cocktail menu that's just truly fantastic. The environment, but it's that next iteration. Like, started as a food truck, then started as or I think it started as a pop up, and then a standalone restaurant. Like, it's that again that next 4% challenge of skill and challenge, just creating that environment that makes it possible for someone to just be so elegant.
Yeah. So let's talk about that in that analogy and take it to the work that we are in, like product delivery, iterative development, so forth. Like, I'm kind of curious, how do we then take all of those things that we've talked about? And this has been awesome. Thank you guys sorry, I've been talking a little bit more just because I'm so passionate about this concept, because I really think it really is for me, the next thing. But like, there's a lot of stuff that we talked about. It very much aligns. It's like, you have the vision and the understanding of what I'm supposed to do, and I have autonomy and all this kind of stuff. But I think where there's interesting things for us to re-examine how we've been kind of creating frameworks and interaction models and things around the work that we work to deliver is, what are those interaction moments that we kind of have in our frameworks that we need to look at again? I have some in mind, but I want you guys, I'm curious your thoughts on this.
Describe more about kind of what you're asking.
So within our, Agile, Lean, all of these different ways of doing delivery, we have principles, which I think are broad enough that you can, autonomy and all that kind of stuff fits really well into that. But then we have the frameworks that get in a little bit of our process. And we've created these processes and kind of interaction models to ensure that we're trying to follow those principles, but then we have something at the end to actually deliver. And my question to you two, without giving away too much, is, based on everything we just talked about, while there are some parallels that we talked about, where could there be maybe some conflicts with what we just talked about? And, where would we maybe need to re-examine the things that we're evangelizing as part of those frameworks?
I think the way that the organization is structured is critical, because if you're just running, when Steve Jobs came back to Apple, he's all of the products, the product lines were all controlled by a group. Okay, so you had whatever the Mac, you had the whatever they had, and he came and said, blowing that up. What we're going to have a services business. We're going to have a software business. We're going to have like an AI intelligence business, and everybody will form around those things. They all report to me, but that gave those groups autonomy and the flexibility and the support that they had, right? Because they were all working together on a thing. And there may be multiple products, but they're around, like services. This is iTunes and or iMusic, whatever it's called now, and Apple TV, whatever, right? So they have all their services business, which is a big part of their business now. And so they organized the organization differently, so that it wasn't just individual product working that way. And I've done that in the past too, and it works. It really does. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but that's just one of the ways I think the organization is structured can enable this if you're not doing it in a more traditional way.
Yeah, that kind of gets to what we talked about in the last podcast, is set the right environment for those clear understanding of what we're trying to achieve and get the heck out of the way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But if you're in your silos, it's much harder. You may still get productivity, but you're not seeing the bigger picture and getting, Jesse mentioned the innovation and kind of the skills to challenge gap. You might just have people like, yeah, I've been in this tower for 15 years and yeah, I'm the one that knows everything about iMusic, and everyone comes to me and that feels good. But you know what? I'm leaving, because like, where's my challenge? Or maybe I'm just going to retire. I'll take my shares and I'll bug out of town, because you're going to, just going to lose them.
And I think that innovation piece of that too is, if you have a group centered around, let's just say services, there's a lot of cross discussion, and that's where innovation comes, because innovation, and Justice heard me say this, and you've heard me say this 1,000 times, it's not a thing you do on Friday afternoons. It should be
Thank
happening
you.
at every step of the way. Every decision you make, you should have that at the forefront of your brain, right? And if you're around like-minded people like that, amazing things can happen. Amazing things you might know, not you wouldn't expect to have happen. But that's where the that's where the that's the best. So if you talk about those days that you feel good, it's like when something comes together and you're like, oh yeah, okay, that worked. That's really great. That's the kind of thing where it's like, but everybody has to be working in tandem. They can't be just off doing their own things, because you feed off each other.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that gets to what we've kind of said it a few times: set the clear objectives, provide immediate feedback, create challenging tasks, foster autonomy, right? Encourage continuous learning, like all of that. And I'm not saying that's contrary to what we've said, but I think, Greg, you kind of said from a kind of organizational standpoint, there's a lot that we can change, right,
Yeah.
to do that. Jess, yeah.
Yeah, well, I think first of all, Greg, I love how aligned we are on this. Like, let's get rid of innovation sprints. That's just
Yeah.
pure bullshit. Um, but also, I think what we're highlighting and underlining, like, I love the Agile is dead, blah 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 thing. Because yeah, kind of, but probably just the branding, because we are continuing to uncover ways of working that are really healthy and helpful. I mean, define clear objectives. You've got product goals. You've got sprint goals. Like, you've got literally, there's like series of objective OKRs that help us to get really clear on that. We've got areas for feedback, right? Like, we've got spaces for that. I'll go through these and then I'm gonna make my point. Feedback. We've got challenging tasks. We are all solving really, really hard problems today. These are not the problems of yesterday. We are constantly changing, which means we constantly need to change, which means that everything's hard. Fostering autonomy. It's literally like part and parcel with agility, is like having autonomous teams who build themselves because they understand what's the best team that's going to be able to go and solve these really interesting problems that we have. And continuous learning, like obvious retrospectives, right? Obvious, like, let's show our stuff, learn from it, and try again. What continues to need to change, and whether we call it agile or call it something else, is, once again, we are talking about ripping out the underlying culture of command and control, of I'm just going to tell you what to do. That's not a clear goal. That's me telling you what to do. Feedback is, and I had this experience earlier this week. Hey, can I give you some feedback? And the person went, yes. I was giving them feedback that was amazing. Like, I was so impressed by what they'd done. And I wanted them to know that. And I wanted them to feel proud about what they were doing. So, feedback being synonymous with negativity. While we should be giving critical feedback, helping people to see the wake that they're leaving behind them, feedback is not one bad thing, right? Anyway, total side note. Challenging tasks. Absolutely. We're all involved in that. Foster autonomy. I mentioned this earlier. Are we putting people in boxes, or are we showing them, hey, here's the human beings and their skills, the way that they collaborate, the way that they communicate? We want to make sure that we have diversity. Now go set yourselves up for success. They fucking know better than someone moving stuff around in a box.
Hey, Jess, there's one thing I want to do, and I'll make it short. What the time that I did these frameworks the right way was when the managers did not have teams. So that's what I'm talking about, development, software development. Managers did not have teams. The teams were totally autonomous. They had a manager for HR reasons, but the teams ran themselves. So there was never a manager who went, that's my team. I'm going to do that, my team, right? It was not that. It was completely decentralized. The teams managed themselves. The teams gave them, like when we came to the year-end reviews, the teams actually reviewed themselves. And I mean, it was an amazing thing to watch, because I at first I was like, seems a little, but it worked and it was awesome. So I think that's kind of what you're talking about.
Yeah, we do actually have some practices, principles, things, whatever you want to call it, in place. But the underlying, it, it's the problem that we ran into with Agile. It's the problem we're going to continue to run into no matter what we call it, is the underlying cultural and human behavior change that needs to happen. And you know what, frankly, if we call the next iteration of Agile flow state, peak performance, like, hell yeah, let's do it. If that new branding allows us to get out there and help people do the really amazing work that they can do 500% more productive and happier because they're in flow state, because you get a dopamine rush and you get serotonin and you get all these amazing things, like, hell yeah, sign me up. Call it whatever you want. We have the basics and we have the ability. It's that we have to rip out that underlying cultural piece that we are so afraid to let go of.
And you know, one thing I would say too is this always drove me crazy when I was an Agile consultant, coach, whatever, was that I was like, this is just a means to an end. This is a tool that a methodology that you use. What are you actually trying to do with it? Like, what's the business purpose for this? Because we're here to make money.
Well, Greg, to go faster, obviously. That's
but Greg, and Jess, here's the thing. This is kind of where this was really the tipping point for me on this subject. We can create the clear objectives. We can create the autonomy. We can give the feedback. We can do all those things that are kind of very much in the world that we've been working in. But if we don't give the space for complete concentration, none of it means anything. And that's the hardest part right now, because we are so easily distracted. So think about just your physiology, right? I'm a night person. I get a lot more done at night than I do in the morning. Now that's changed a little bit after having a kid and a toddler. Like, I'm up more earlier and kind of my mind starts going and so forth. So that's changed over time. But the challenge to what we have, and this is where I was kind of going with the framework challenges and so forth, is
I'm a morning person.
You're a morning person. There are people, Greg tells these great stories about how programmers would come in their pajamas at like 11 o'clock in the morning, and the very white collar bosses would be like, why are they coming here at 11 o'clock in their pajamas? Right? What, they're not doing work. He's like, no, they've been working until 3 in the morning. Right? So if we have things like daily stand-ups
at 8 a.m. Yeah, that works.
At 8 a.m. So here's the thing about this, the whole getting in the state of flow. They basically, to create those triggers, and it's individual triggers. And again, it's your own cocktail, right? Physiology is a big piece of it. Like, it's going to be harder for you to get in flow. If I'm an evening person, getting into it in the morning is going to be harder than later in the evening, right? And you kind of have to like block out about 2 hours for that concentration point, right? And if I finally get into that state of flow, I'm creating 500% increase in productivity. If I get distracted, it could take 15, 30, 60, 90 minutes if they're able to get back into flow. And they've actually done the studies on programmers specifically, right? Is that it could take them a long time to get back into that state of flow and that productivity. So the principles were spot on, right? More human interactions, less documentation, because all of those things pull us away from our concentration, right? But I think we maybe swung the pendulum a little too far in some of the framework, thinking about some of our scaled frameworks that have very heavy processes drop down on top of what we're doing. We all know, particularly now being remote working, it's very interesting dichotomy between the two things, because remote working should provide the environment for us to actually get into more flow, because no one's coming up and hanging over the cubicle and saying, hey, they're not being rude, right? I'm at home, and like, I mean, I don't have a kid at home and I have my own space, or a dog. If I don't have a dog barking, like, I have my own space to be able to kind of just get into it. But what's happened is the pendulum gone too much of, oh, okay, people have all this extra time, we're going to schedule a bunch of meetings. So I'm like in meetings from 8 until 5. Jess was right before this podcast. She was in a meeting that was probably like 2 hours long. That's 2 hours away from Jess being 500% more productivity. So this is where I'm going with this, is that we have all of the top level things, but we don't have it at that individual level to provide the space to get into this. And that's the challenge that I see for us going forward, because it is a big change in ways of working.
Do you know what's exciting about that though? I don't know. Like, my thoughts aren't fully formed on this, but I think you're 100% right. And I'm really, because I think we actually are developing, because of the pandemic and because of the need to figure this stuff out. I think about like our colleagues across the ocean, like we were asking them to work with us at ungodly hours or to participate in things like at times that just were insane and stupid and unhumane. But we actually are building currently the tools that will help us to be able to provide space, like to provide a space where we can still collaborate, still have interactions, still have those clarifications and those, like, you can embed a video or do whatever it is that you need to do to have those moments where we really need to like see each other and spend that time. But the person on the other end is engaging with those things in ways and in times and in spaces that they're actually going to be able to absorb and collaborate and communicate back and do all of those things. So I think there's actually a significant amount of possibility here that we haven't paid attention to in the past. Sometimes the technology wasn't there, but also we haven't been paying attention to. We've just been asking for things unequivocally.
Well, you were saying like we have the technology and stuff, and I saw Greg go, the big sigh, right? Because I think intrinsically our reaction over time from an Agile perspective was because our clients are like, implement the whatever tool and you are now transformed. I think kind of interesting we're on the other end of it. And Jess, you work for a company that's very much aligned with this, right? Which is, I think we need to embrace the tooling a little bit more, not from a, hey, put all your stuff in, but just as a hypothetical, I get rid of daily stand-ups, right? I just basically say, hey, it's clear we did meet to say this is what we're going to get done in this particular amount of time. Go off. You have the objectives, you have the autonomy, you go get in your state of flow, and by this particular time of day, make sure you have your updates in the tool that this has been done. That's all I'm asking of you. So you can figure out what time works for you to make those updates, right? And we have a clear sense of it at some point of the day of where things are. Does that still accomplish the... Go ahead.
How do you do the thing though, where it's like you see that one thing and you're like, man, that's been there for a couple of days, and then the partner on the team says, hey man, you've been saying this is good for a while. What's going on there? That, those kinds of interactions I think are so valuable.
And I think we have to change the context of those conversations. The context of those conversations are not, hey, I haven't seen an update. Is everything okay? Is everything going? Hey, what's blocking you from getting into the flow that you need to get into? Something's obviously, if you have said, I believe I can get this done.
Or a different conversation. Hey, I think you'd need to reword. We would need to figure out a way to reword it. But is the challenge skill balance offset for this particular problem? And how do you say that in a way that's not going to be like, no, I got this. But it's that. So I think, I don't know. Again, always with a balance, and it depends, and all of the things. But I think it's interesting to think about, like, how can we do this in a way that actually creates more autonomy? Because I think that's what you're talking about, and gives more space because flow, as you mentioned, takes time, and effort, and all of those things.
Yeah, I'm not. So I'm not against tools. I'm against tools defining your work. That's what I'm against.
Yeah.
The tools should work for you, and they should be very purposeful in that aim, and they should stay clear and simple. So that's my take on tools. But I don't think it won't solve the problem that Jessica just described about those human interactions where it's like people are holding each other accountable, or they're just asking questions, or they're whatever.
Yeah, along those lines, and I should try and kind of wrap this in a bow with going one direction and saying, hey, are we, how far away are we? Jess, I was thinking about it from like an ORS perspective, so the organization relationship system coaching perspective, and kind of where is there alignment? Because I think that's been kind of the space that I've kind of been in. I'm like, that it's so aligned in terms of what we talked about, like the concept of immediate feedback and positive psychology, right? Like providing constructive feedback that highlights strengths but it still encourages growth, right? Like it's not, we were talking about feedback is not like, it doesn't have to necessarily be inherently negative, or the balance of challenge and skill with, what's it called? Role theory, right? Kind of identifying the diverse skills and strengths within a team.
And who's
right?
holding the role for too long, and who's tired of the role that they're playing, and all of that. Yeah. I think I don't know. I'm so curious about the direction that humanity is taking. I think
There's a lot of that going around.
Yeah. I think that,
I'm going into.
I mean, we talked about
we
get a dopamine rush from like, this, right? It's just
human beings are pattern makers. Like we are patterns. We're over and over patterns. Our brains are patterns. It's all of the patterns.
That's exactly what we're talking about. Like it's the cocktail that like physiologically, this is how we work. Yeah. Psychologically, this is how we work. Yeah.
So we could use these patterns for good, I think, and in the technology that's coming and the technology that we're building, like how do we use these patterns for good? I don't know. I don't know where it's going to go. I don't know how it's going to manifest, but it's interesting.
Yeah, and kind of to tie some of that up, but the last kind of taking all those things and that the kind of the thing that I really the concept that I really liked that came from Orrisk was like the concept of deep democracy, right? And kind of with flow and peak performance is kind of that loss of self-consciousness, right? And deep democracy. So like creating that inclusive environment where everyone feels valued, right? And teams can reduce kind of self-consciousness and kind of foster that open communication, right? Because it's less about what widgets are you providing, what sort of value are you providing. It's, setting you free and having the environment for you to then have innovation constantly be part of what you do. And like being problem solvers, as we talked about with Nitin a long time ago, right? And just kind of setting that environment. I think we've talked about this in the podcast in the past. And just to kind of quickly wrap this up, is like we talked about, it was like very much, we had the manifesto was very high level. Then we got into frameworks. Then we got into scaled frameworks. And then we got into an interesting kind of commingling of these coaching concepts with the frameworks and how do we make them work, and are they separate or are they together? And I think for me, because you have kind of the psychological and physiological and the kind of science behind these things, is that I can go to the bean counters and say, do you want 500% increase in productivity? Get the hell out of my way.
Yeah.
Which I've never had that argument before.
Yeah.
Greg's thinking. I'm curious.
Always. I just wonder why I look like a lobster on this camera. I don't have a red light anywhere near me. Just don't get it.
Hey, Red Lobster's still alive. We thought they've come back from the dead. So yeah, they got bought by someone in there. Yeah. So those butter rolls are still around.
Yeah. Everybody biscuit's still alive.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks guys for indulging me in this particular
This is fascinating. I'm so
space that I've been
Yeah, I
really
agree.
diving into. And as always, for anyone that wants to, Craig mentioned at the beginning, we're on YouTube, Agile After Dark. Probably found us here already. Feel free to leave comments, subscribe, do a thumbs up, do a thumbs down. That's fine too. We'll take instant feedback either way. We're all good with that.
feedback. It'll get us right in the flow.
Exactly. Well, thanks, guys. Appreciate you as always, and we'll catch you on the next one.
All right.
Bye.